This is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is the second video in this DOM playlist. So in the last video, we just kind of explored what the DOM is, how to connect this JavaScript file. Now in this video, what I want to do is focus on how to select nodes. Okay, so basically we saw that starting from the document, I could just, access the body and then figure out what the body's children are, and then from there select a particular item and select a node. But if you've written HTML, nodes can have a lot of children and a lot of children and a lot of children and a lot of children. It can become quite a windy tree. So the best way to select an element, there's actually quite a few ways. We're not going to go through all of them because really there's one way that just kind of just works 90% of the time. So let's just delete this. We have the H1. Now that cheese should disappear. Yep. So let's try to grab that H1 in a different way. So we always start off with the document object, document. Now there's a bunch of different ways you could use. Like if we do document.get, we'll see there's like get elements by class name. So you pass in the class name, it grabs it. Document by name, document by tag name. Now this is all well and good, but there is one method that does all of these in one. It's called query selector. Okay, and what query selector does is that it queries the DOM node you want to select based on the CSS selector. So it finds the first element that matches your CSS selector. So how would I normally just choose an H1 in CSS? Well, if I just want to select the H1, I could literally just write H1 in CSS. So this is where really understanding like CSS and how to select different elements in CSS becomes really useful, other side from writing your CSS. So this, and again, always just to double check that we got what we expected. Let's console log the H1. And look, it still works. This ended up getting the H1 that I expected, and I can see in the console that it did. So now I can just do like I did before, H1.inner text, changing the text inside the two tags. I can just change this to cheese. Okay, nice. Now let's create some other elements. So let's see here. Let's create a H2. Except this H2, I'm going to give an ID. An ID of H2. Okay. And then we'll create an H3. An H3 that has a class name of H3. And then I will create an H4 where we're just going to make up something. Okay, I'm going to, this H4, I'm going to create a custom property called cheese. Okay, and yeah. The reason why I like to use cheese a lot is because when I name something cheese, that wasn't built into JavaScript, that wasn't built into HTML. So it just illustrates the point that you can just name things what you want. Okay, that's the reason why I use cheese, just to show that this is something you can kind of flexibly name. Okay, so H4 cheese, and we'll say cheese equals H4. Okay, so we're going to select each one of these elements one by one, the ID, the class, and the custom attributes. So you can see different CSS selectors, okay, and how I could use them with query selector. So next thing I want to do is I want to grab the H2. Except I'm not going to grab the H2 using the tag name like I did here. I'm going to grab the H2 using its ID, document.query selector. And again, the way you grab an ID in CSS is you use a hash. So it would be hash H2, and that would grab the element. And again, just to double check, let's console log it. We always like to confirm that we got what we think we did, H2. And there I see we grabbed the H2 with the ID of H2. Okay, and again, it's because I referred to its CSS ID using a CSS selector. Thus, the function name query selector. Okay, cool. Now let's grab the H3. Const H3 equals document. H3 equals document dot query selector. And this one we're going to grab by its class. Now how do I grab a class in CSS? Using dots. So it's dot H3. So let's see if that worked. Console dot log h3. And look, see, it grabbed the h3 with a class of h3. Nice. Okay, so again, I use hashes for grabbing IDs, dots for grabbing classes. And again, the difference between a class and ID is an ID has to be unique. So only one element can have the same ID, while multiple elements could have the same class. Okay, and then const h4 will grab the custom attribute. How do I do that? Document.query selector. And now in this case, to grab a custom attribute, you use square brackets. So it'd be square brackets cheese equals h4. Now it would look something like that, although I probably don't want to use single quotes. I mean, I'll probably want to use single quotes because I'm wrapping it in double quotes. So it would be that, and just to double check that we actually grabbed the element, we'll console.log h4. And see, we grabbed the right element because I grabbed it based on its attribute of cheese. Okay, and you can create custom attributes. There's actually a lot of libraries that are built around the idea that there's a custom attribute that it uses, and then all the built-in functionality is grabbing those custom attributes to manipulate the DOM. Okay, so we now know how to select a single element, and then we can manipulate that element. Okay, now let's say I changed all of these into H1s. So I'll hold down Alt, cancel. I'll click, hold down Alt, so that way I can choose multiple entry points. Change these all to H1. Okay, so now they're all H1s. I'm still selecting each one is still selecting the right one, because again, I'm not selecting it based on the tag. So the ID one's going to grab the ID one, the class is going to grab the class one. But what if I wanted to grab all the H1s? Okay, so const all H1s. What I can do is there's another function called document.query selector all. This sends you back what's called a HTML or a node list of all the nodes that match the query. So in this case, I'm going to query just the tag h1. So let's console.log all h1, and see I get this node list. Okay, and it works. Okay, so I have this list. So there's h1, the four h1s, and I can grab a particular h1 by like chaining off of it and grabbing and using the item property like I did before. Okay, so if you saw at the end of the video, I did like item 0. But me personally, I prefer like having my node list as an array, because I can then use like map and for each and filter, all the things that I'm used to. So to convert this into an array, just wrap it in curly brackets and then use a spread operator, ... What this does, see, now it turns it just to a normal array with the nodes inside of it. So see, like the first item is h1, the second item is h2. Okay, and that's much easier because now I can access the elements using just normal array syntax instead of having to deal with like this node list object construct. Okay, just a trick of the trade that makes life a lot easier. And the cool thing about that is that once I've turned the node list into a normal loop, I can take advantage of all the different array methods like splice and push and pop and all this stuff. Okay, so in that case, if I wanted to, I could loop over each h1. So I could do all h1 dot for each, which I do think that if it's a node list, it still has access to at least for each, depending on the browser. But I still just find it easier working with the array. So I'll just say node, that each item is a node. And then I can just change each one. I can just say, hey, node, and then again, for each takes a second argument index. And this is a callback array method, not the topic of this video. So if you're not familiar with the callback array methods, go watch my video on array callback methods or array methods in general. Okay, node index. So we'll just say node.innerText equals, I'll use backticks so that way I can use interpolation, and we'll just say, or actually I'll just make it equal the index. And see, now each of the h1s equal its place in the index. So the first h1 is 0, the second h1 is 1, 2, 3, because I looped through each one and changed its text to the right one. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So you can see we can select the nodes and then we can manipulate them. which is a lot of fun. Okay, and there's a lot of other ways we can manipulate them. You can put HTML inside of them. So if I want to put actual HTML in the element, so let's pretend I have a div here. Okay, so we have a div. Let me select the div. Okay, so const the div equals document dot query selector div. Okay. Then what I can do is, again, I like to always double check to make sure that your variables have what you think they have. So div. So yep, so it has the div. Good. And again, see, notice right here it shows you what line of the code. So if you're wondering which one belongs to which line, I can see that. See, this log belongs to app.js line 11, which is this line right here. Okay, so take advantage of your IDE. Okay, cool. So document.query selector all, h1, what do I do? Okay, the div. So if I can take the div and I can edit its inner HTML property. Now its inner HTML property allows you to literally write HTML. And again, it's not a function, it's a property, so I can assign it a value. And I can assign it like an h1 that says hello. And then below that, we'll have a p tag that has some gibberish. Okay, and then if I scroll down, see here's the div with the text within the div. And I can actually see it there. See, it added the h1 and the p tag within the div. So I can there's some flexible ways for me to like manipulate what's going on here. Cool. So to summarize, we can select elements using the CSS selectors. We can select them by their ID, we can select them by their class name, we can select them by their attributes, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Any CSS selector you can imagine, you can use. Although, honestly, most of the time you'll probably get by just fine with just classes and IDs. You can select multiple elements, an array of things that match your query, using query selector all. Using this little brackets and spread operator, you can convert it to an array to work with easier. And yeah, so now we know how to select. We know how to change like the inner text and the inner HTML. There's a lot of other properties. We'll focus on the styling properties next. I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great one. Ciao.